Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the War Room, which is, of course, our interview series as part of the Clone Star Pod. I am your host, Sean Ferrick, and joining me is the man who's done everything that the word effects is attached to. Visual effects, special effects, makeup effects, miniature effects, and, of course, animation, editing. He's an author as well and a filmmaker. Joe Fordham, how are you?
Pleased to meet you.
Oh, it is an absolute pleasure. I'm legitimately looking at your CV. Is there anything you haven't done?
I'm kind of I've had a broad experience in the film industry. I'm not an actor by any means, but first thing I did was as an extra. I was a film extra, and I was a really bad film extra because I always wanted to just look at the camera, and that's the thing you're not supposed to do. And I got told off a few times, but for that. But I'm not a very good singer. My dad was a singer. He was a jazz singer, and he could carry a tune, and so is my brother. He inherited that, but I love music, but I can't carry a tune. So that. And I'm also a really bad clarinet player as well.
The fact that you have to qualify it as that you're a bad player means that you at least know how to play, which puts you ahead of me in that field.
Oh, well, my dogs would disagree. They run a mile.
Obviously, there's so much, and I want to get into it really quickly, but I think one of the biggest, most recent projects is your Star Trek First Contact, the making of the film. This book is fantastic. Tell us about how that process came together. Like, what brought you to this project in particular?
Well, I had a relationship with Titan Books. I was while I was doing my 20 years service with Cinefex magazine, may she rest in peace. My editor Jodie Duncan introduced me to the editors at Titan Books, Laura Price and Simon Ward in London, and we did a project together that actually wasn't published. I won't go into that, but it was a fun experience, and I had a nice relationship with them. And when Cinefex ceased publication because of the COVID-19 pandemic, long story, but it was a very sad ending to 41 years in print. I was with them for 20. I was on LinkedIn in an automatic pop-up that appeared, and Simon, who's no longer with Titan Books, he works for Eon, James Bond's production company. He wrote, "Oh, congratulations on 20 years of service with Cinefex," and I private messaged him back, and I said, "Well, actually, I've got some sad news for you. No longer with Cinefex, but it hadn't been announced at that point. We were doing our last issue, and Greg Shea was very graciously keeping us on, so we weren't completely out on our asses at Christmas time. But so I knew the end was nigh, and Simon said, "Oh, well, that's really sad, but would you like to come back and do some more Titan books?" And he proposed two projects to me, and both of which were a quick yes. He said, do you like Star Trek, and are you into Alien? And they're two things that are very dear to my heart. I used to watch the original series when it was first syndicated on the BBC. My mum was a big fan, not my dad, but my mum liked it. My dad thought it was he was more of a Western fan. My mum was more into the genre stuff. And I, grew up watching that and and TNG, and Titan had the license for the making of the series of books that and a good friend of mine, Jeff Bond, and his buddy Gene Kazicki had just done a book about the first Star Trek movie, or they were in the process of doing it, I think, but with Titan. And the way that franchise publishing works is the studio works with the publisher, and they have marketing teams. Not to sort of denigrate it in any ways. It's just the way they work. And they decided that after the first one was a really popular book, the next one they wanted to pick was apparently one of the most popular Star Trek movies, which was First Contact. And so I said yes immediately and immersed myself back into it. And I hadn't seen the film, I confess, since it was first in the theaters. But I had fond memories of it, and the more I got into it, the more I really started to appreciate it for what Jonathan Frakes really did, and the screenwriters in bringing the cast of the Next Generation to their first feature level, because it was sort of, the general feeling was it was a little bit compromised when they did the handoff with Generations, from Kirk to Picard. So they made a really neat, fun, tight story, and it was great fun digging into it with the screenwriters, Ronald D. Moore and Brandon Braga, and had a wonderful experience interviewing Rick Berman, and I managed to track down Herman Zimmerman, the great production designer, and it gave me an opportunity to renew acquaintances with my friends at Industrial Light and Magic, who did such great work. And John Knoll was such a sweetheart. He was visual effects supervisor on the show, and he's now the creative supervisor, overseeing a lot of productions, Industrial Light and Magic, and I spoke with so a lot of people out there, and to my great delight, I received in my inbox one day an email from Jonathan Frakes responding to my request for an interview, and he said, "Make it so."
Oh,
So I printed that, and I've got it pinned to my wall here. And Jonathan has been a great supporter, and I renewed contact with him, no pun intended, on another book that I wrote recently about the Picard show. But so it just that's the long version of a story. So it's kind of a pragmatic approach. Yes, I gun for hire, but I came from a love of Star Trek, and it was a rediscovery for me of the movie. So
that's actually fascinating, because it's funny as well. Sometimes I think that when say we as fans, interact with people who are working in whatever fashion within the franchise. It's like everyone must be, the absolute most diehard fan. You must be able to recall every star date at will and everything. It's like, you grew up with the show, but you weren't necessarily, it's not like you watched First Contact every week or anything like that. It's fascinating in that respect. So like you got to rediscover it through a deep analysis of it.
Yeah. I mean, I did debate whether or not I should wear my Star Trek uniform for this interview, but I elected for the conservative button-down shirt. But I certainly appreciate and the roles that the fans have had, because to a degree I am one. But you have to, when you're a writer, you have to be able to step back and see the big picture. And deliver to a brief. I had to. The book was done on a tight schedule. I managed to get 16 interviews in 2 months. And it might not seem like a lot, but it came out to about 62,000 words of transcript. And my target was I had to turn it into a 20,000 word manuscript. Now, that was something which was a budgeted thing, like making a movie. Generally they're about 90 to 120 minutes for a reason, because it costs so much to print a book, like it costs so much to shoot a movie. So I'll come clean. Of course, I've looked at the reviews on Amazon, and the first review that appeared was like within 30 minutes of the PDF version of the Kindle version of the book appearing, and the criticism was that the book was too thin. So I don't know how in 30 minutes he managed to read the book, but it was it's my duty sort of as a professional writer to deliver us to a certain length. So it's tough to put that lens on it, but you have to do that as to make something that is going to be feasible for that my publisher could print and could afford, because they got to budget it all out. So there's a lot of pragmatic details, but as I say, to the point you're making, Star Trek wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the fans. It would have ended with season 3 of Jim Kirk.
Yeah.
And so and the creators of the films and the series, they're very much aware of that. So it's a real give and take, and you have to honor the passion that the fans have, and you have to get things right. I took my first trip on the Starship Enterprise covering JJ's first Star Trek movie, Star Trek 11, as I called it stubbornly for years, just to distinguish it, and I was kind of terrified going in, because I knew that people live and breathe Star Trek like it's a religion, and there are a lot of core values to Star Trek that I think sometimes get lost in the heat of the fan discussion. That Gene Roddenberry's very progressive vision of the future, this universe that has built upon his vision. So you have to be aware of all of that, and I don't think ILM would mind me telling me this story, but when I got immersed in all things Star Trek when I was writing that Cinefex story. And so I got out my old making of Star Trek, the original show, and I was reading all about Matt Jeffries and stuff. And I was in the conversation with the brilliant gentleman who was the head of the art department on that show. And he was talking about all the visual effects supervisors. Anyway, somebody pretty senior who'd been physically, building the new Enterprise, which is what Don Shea called the story, the new Enterprise. And he was referring to the dish on the front of the secondary hull, and he used the term reflector dish. I said, "You mean deflector dish?" He said, "What?" I said, "Cancelled." I was like, I'll make it correct in my story, but just be aware that don't talk to another website that will take you to task over that." So that you have to, and he's like, "Oh God, oh yeah." So that we do want to honor and I'll use a term that's been used, a pejorative term, the rivet counters, because those people know this stuff. I mean, and they're brilliant at it. The passion that they bring to it, and some of them, most recently, have transitioned to working on the art departments of the show, and they've just brought a whole new level of of attention to detail to it. And you got to honor the fans.
I think that's, of course, that's true. It must be difficult when you've got to honor the fans, as you say, but then, like you said, your publisher is like, you've got to do 20,000 words. How do you go? What is your process for going through and going, right, I have to be absolutely ruthless here, and Herman Zimmerman has given me a beautiful 5,000 word explanation, I need to cut that down to a sentence?
Well, I didn't do that to Herman, but because I didn't know if I was going to be able to get him. It was I think it was through John Eaves that I got him. John was a great ally. I'm sure your viewers know who John Eaves is. So that was gold, and I was aware of that. So you got to bear in mind where the major interest is, there it does keep coming back to this pragmatic approach, because sometimes, although you really try hard for someone that's very, very important to the show, they just might not be available.
For sure.
There is a beautiful quote from Sir Patrick Stewart that closes the book, and I had to transcribe that from one of his press appearances on the, I think it was the 40th anniversary or the 25th anniversary. Anyway, but because Sir Patrick wasn't available, and it was like, oh, how do I write this without him? Brent Spiner did such a wonderful performance in that, but he wasn't available either, and he's got his own reasons for choosing to be selective with what interviews he gives, but in the time that I needed, he wasn't available. So there are some heartbreaking things that happen, but you do just have to weigh up what's practical. One thing I did set myself was that I really didn't want to rely on regurgitating material. There was a book about First Contact that came out in '96 that I found a very candid interview with the primary editor of it. Sorry, I should have written his name down. Very clever gentleman who's gone on to do many things, but he told a story about how Paramount came to him after he'd been basically covering First Contact up and down on the press junket, and said, "Can you give us a book in like a few weeks?" And he had to go back to all of his press clippings, and basically he confessed that he threw that book together in record time and burnt himself out. So I knew that book existed, but I thought, well, anyone who's really interested in it, they probably already got that book. So I'm not just going to go and get that book and start transcribing those interviews. So I had to make that decision. Well, that was just my own, because I just wanted to put myself in the position of someone who's got, when the book comes out, they're quite expensive. You've got to justify that. You got to give somebody the original material. So it's all, apart from the quote that I transcribed from Sir Patrick and a small quote from Gene Roddenberry that I took from a Cinefantastique interview. Everything else was original for that book. So that was my goal, to give fans something that would be worth their while. And so the Gene Roddenberry quote, incidentally, came from the actual transcript that Don Shea did of his. He gave me, Don Shea, the publisher of Cinefex, he gave me the transcript of an interview that he did with Gene around the time when Star Trek motion picture was coming out. So I read that with great gusto, and I found one particular thing where Don was asking Gene about, at the time, you imagine this, Star Trek the motion picture hasn't come out yet. So how do you keep Star Trek? And Gene had a very pithy answer that's in the book. I can't recall it verbatim right now, but I thought, oh, actually, that's very apropos what they were doing with trying to come up with a movie that presented Star Trek in its next generation guise in a movie that stood on its own. And I really think they succeeded very well in doing that. So you just kind of have to cut to the heart of it. What's the most important thing that really speaks to the story you're trying to tell with this? The reason for this book was it was the 25th anniversary of the movie. And then COVID happened, so unfortunately it came out a year late. But that was the reason. You wanted to honor it. So I had that lens that this was going to be the movie as seen now. So I was able to get John Knoll reflecting on how the technology was at the time and how it is now, and those sorts of things. And that was great fun. When I got Marina Sirtis on the phone, she gave me some very candid and beautiful, funny anecdotes, and I was able to tie that back to what Jonathan Frakes gave me, and of course was able to bring alive that wonderful drunk scene, the back and forth on that. So you just had to sort of pick, that was a great scene in the movie. Everyone remembers that. So that I knew was going to be a specific thing that I wanted to focus on. So you had to pick your battles. It's the answer, really.
It is. It's something I think that anyone who might be watching or listening along with this and who has done writing in any kind of professional setting will know that, there is the beauty of draft 1 and there is the absolute pain of draft 2.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, it can be challenging. I think ultimately rewarding. I hope you agree. Have you found? I hope you have found it to be rewarding.
Well, the great part of writing the book that I did on First Contact was going for a ride on the Enterprise with the characters and in the Borg cube, because that's what it feels like when you really get into it. You feel like you're there, and it's a real privilege. So that was definitely the most rewarding thing for me to. We got some nice reviews as well, so it was. I'm glad some fans found value in it.
Yeah. I love it. And now, obviously, there is a continued relationship with Titan Books. So what can you tell us about that? Because I know there's upcoming projects and things, and what can you talk about?
Well, I've written a book. The Alien book came to fruition in the sense that I landed a contract and came up with a concept, brought a small team on board, and we did an Alien encyclopedia. I'm very excited about that, and that's it's a bigger book, very detailed, and Titan has revealed a cover of that, and they did a beautiful kind of hieroglyphic of different alien life forms entwined. I think they're currently aiming that to come out on Alien Day, the 26th of April next year, and that has been pushed back because these things, they take a long time to put together. And then out of the blue, Titan asked me if I was interested in Picard, and I had written one of my last Cinefex stories about the first season, so I was very familiar with it. And I said, "Oh, sure," And what I didn't know at the time was what an amazing finale that ended up with. So everyone's seen it now, but at the time, they were filming or in post production at least the season 3. So I had to ask CBS through Titan, well, how are we going to do this? You've got to let me in, and there's a huge amount of trust there that you have to do to earn that and honor that. And of course, I was under massive NDA and everything.
Of course, yeah.
But I will just say they made it possible. They made it so. And I'm good at keeping secrets because I did that for 20 years for Cinefex. So that book is done also. So they're just putting that one to bed. So it's a great privilege to be entrusted with the keys to the kingdom like that. But that's what I've got coming out next from Titan, and other things. I'm just doing some work for American cinematographer and some other stuff I can't talk about. But
that is exciting. I for one, I will be picking up the Alien Encyclopedia and the Star Trek Picard book. Love Alien over here. But it's just very cool. I love the fact that there's finally an encyclopedia. I'm just because I was on the website, so it's written as if it's in universe. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. In fact, I'm actually talking to you from 500 years in the future, which is what I had to do. I had to travel 500 years in the future because if you plot the timeline out, that's when it is. So that was quite a feat, but a very interesting mind game. You have to kind of put yourself into the it is an encyclopedia. Pick up an Encyclopedia Britannica and have a look. Those things are they have a certain structure to them. So it was unlike anything I've written before, but huge thrill. And I just add, I think it's out now, but there's some. I got my very talented team included a brilliant gentleman in I believe Dundee in Scotland. He runs the Strange Shapes website, Johnny Kennedy. But I'm mispronouncing his first name because he uses the Scottish version. It's Sinead. And I knew Johnny's writing for years because I loved his. He's got the best alien website out there, just great stuff. So I knew I wanted him on board. Titan introduced me to another very talented lady, Clara Carija, who used to run the Alien Mother website, like writing as if she was Mother, and brilliant lady in Australia. And then I also brought on board a friend of mine in the north of England who used to work for Cinefex with me in the last 5 years of Cinefex, Graham Edwards. I knew that Graham was an expert writer, very seasoned guy, and he's done a lot of books. So, so they were like my teammates on that, and it was really interesting being able to pick the team, and assimilate all of the data. So yeah, great fun. I'm quite proud of that one. I'm looking forward to seeing how it all pans out. But again, you got to honor a large, big following. I do have some history with Alien. I worked for brilliant makeup effects artist Steve Johnson for 5 years. I was not a makeup artist, but I was a coordinator at his show for 5 years. So I met a lot of brilliant artists that worked with Steve. Chief among them, H.R. Giger. I used to answer the phone when Giger would call when we were working on the movie Species. And I wrote a little blog about that when Giger died. I was very sad because I think he was unfairly maligned for his eccentricities, because I found him to be a very warm-hearted fellow, and he would call from Switzerland, and Steve was on a terrible deadline, and Steve would say, take a message, and so I would speak to him, and he'd go, hello, this is Giger from Switzerland. And I had to sort of take notes, and then he started asking my opinion, and it's like, well, this looks great. And then I might make a random comment, and then the fax machine would start buzzing behind me, and a drawing would start appearing from Giger's studio in Switzerland. But it's like including something that I'd said. It's well, I mean, trying to walk back my comments. It's I'm just taking the message here, But that was wonderful. So I do have a signed book that Giger sent me at the end of Species. A big, huge box arrived from Switzerland, full of Swiss chocolate, bars of Swiss chocolate, and for all the crew. And he had this self-published book that was full of his weirdest art, and he signed his name in a silver pen. So I treasure that. So anyway, I've got a link to Alien from that. Plus, I loved that movie. So my dad took me to see Alien when I was a kid. I wasn't old enough to see it in a cinema, so I've dedicated the Alien book to my dad. And my mum, was the Star Trek fan, so that's why I dedicated the First Contact book to her. And both of that, I lost both my parents in the recent years, so it was kind of a poignant thing. Neither of them got to see the books, but that was nice too.
That is a beautiful tribute, and I can only imagine how meaningful that it would have been for them as well. So I think that's a beautiful.
Yeah, well, my dad wasn't into sci-fi, but thank you. Yeah,
yeah. Or even because I have images of my own father in the back saying, like, kind of, I might not be into what you're into, but he remembered something I did, and that's important.
Yeah.
What I'll do is now I'm coming up to the end of this now. I really appreciate your time, but before we go, I just want to say thank you very, very much. Really appreciate you giving me your time today, and I have a final question for you. So nice and easy. We ask it of all of our guests. Joe Fordham, what does Star Trek mean to you?
Hope. Star Trek really is still an amazing, inspirational view of what humanity can be, and I think that was really the core of Gene's vision, and I still think there's elements of that in the current, the best of the current shows that are going. So that's what I take from it. It's an interesting philosophy, an inclusive philosophy, and a brave philosophy, because a lot of science fiction does tend to give a darker view of humanity. But I think Gene's vision was an optimistic one for the future, and even in our darkest years, and certainly we've been living through some, that it has been a valuable thing for people to aspire to. So I think that's what Star Trek is for me. It's an aspirational vision of the future. So
I love it. I love it. Joe, thank you so much for your time. For everyone who's watching along, where is the best place to find your work and to interact with you online?
Well, I do have a little corner of the internet, flashfilms.us. That's where I've kind of got a lot of writing samples. But you can find the Titan books at the Titan website, and that'll direct you to wherever you are in the world to pick them up. And American Cinematographer has just started publishing some of my writing, so that'll set you on a path if you're really interested. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much. And everyone who's watching and listening along, thank you so much. We will be back, of course, next week with another episode of The War Room. You have been awesome, and live long and prosper.